Hello 474 students. This short video is meant to be an introduction to the Chapter 4 content on corporate culture and how corporate culture influences ethical and unethical behavior in the workplace. So what is corporate culture? Culture can be formally defined as a shared pattern of beliefs, expectations, and meanings that influence and guide the thinking behaviors of the members of that organization. It is important to remember that people shape organizational culture, and organizational culture shapes the people. So, for example, the students at Longwood University influence what the culture is at Longwood. Students coming to class and having good attendance, participating, helping out in the community, engaging in volunteer projects, engaging in athletic events, helps to shape the culture here at Longwood. Similarly, as the culture evolves, the culture can also shape the behaviors of the students at Longwood. This figure from the chapter material illustrates how there is a reciprocal relationship between the culture and members of the culture within an organizational setting. So we've discussed corporate culture briefly in terms of textbook definitions, but it's important to talk about how we could actually use language to characterize corporate culture. And we have to do this so that we can understand culture before we can proceed to understanding how it can influence ethical or unethical behavior. So we can look at corporate culture under a variety of broad dimensions. One might be observable artifacts. These are manifestations of an organization's culture that employees can easily see or talk about. So for example, we could look at symbols. These might be things that we see throughout an organization, which could include a corporate logo or images on the website or uniforms. We could talk about physical structures, so an organization's buildings and internal office designs. Think about an organizational setting in which, I'll give you an example. I was recently doing some consulting work for an organization in which I showed up, and it was a very free-flow environment. So there weren't cubicles, there weren't even assigned desks, so employees came in every day and sat down wherever. It was very much an open space concept. All of the conference rooms had glass doors, again meant to make it more easier for people to look in and see and understand sort of what was going on within the workplace. And so it was meant to encourage collaboration, as opposed to an office where everyone is sort of working independently in their own offices with their doors closed. Observable artifacts can also include language, so this would be jargon, slang, or slogans within the walls of an organization. Stories, which can consist of anecdotes, accounts, legends, and myths that are passed down from cohort to cohort within an organization. Oftentimes when you join an organization, the current employees will tell you these stories as a way to help new employees assimilate into the culture. Rituals can include daily or weekly planned routines that occur within an organization. So a meeting that occurs every Monday morning at 8 a.m., or a pizza party or happy hour every Friday at 5. Then also ceremonies or formal events performed in front of an audience of organizational members. When I used to work at Whole Foods, we used to take time at every staff meeting, or team member meeting we would call it, to acknowledge other team members who had helped us out within the last month. And this was a neat opportunity to thank someone publicly for their assistance. In addition to observable values, we might characterize corporate culture by looking at espoused values. These are the beliefs, philosophies, and norms that a company explicitly states. So these can be things published within documents, employee handbooks, or policy statements. And then finally, we have basic underlying assumptions. These might be taken for granted beliefs and philosophies that are so ingrained that employees simply act on them rather than questioning the validity of their behavior in a given situation. So for example, you might think of an organization where showing up 5 minutes early for a meeting is actually showing up late, and the cultural norm is to show up at least 10 minutes early to make sure that you are prepared for a meeting. This might be a basic underlying assumption that employees have, and new employees will have to learn when they join the organization. So already we can begin to see how corporate culture might be used to shape employee behaviors, and employees might shape the corporate cultures in return. So how does this pertain to ethics? Well, we might ask ourselves, what are the benefits of an ethical culture? So we might define an ethical culture as one in which employees are empowered and expected to act in ethically responsible ways even when the law does not require it. And that's the key here, even when the law does not require it. There can be several different types of ethical-based cultures. The traditional approach, which you'll read about in your book, has to do with the compliance-based culture. This is a culture in which the employees are focused on what the letter of the law says they should do. And this could include federal and state laws and regulations. It could also include employee policies or policies pertaining to how one is to treat customers. And operating under this perspective, using this approach, we would say that an individual was being ethical if they were complying with the federal laws and regulations, the employment policies, and so forth, and that anything else they did was acceptable as long as they obeyed the rules. Conversely, now we see more organizations switching to what we would call a values-based or integrity-based culture. This type of culture is much more flexible and far-sighted. As we learned in Chapter 1, it is impossible to write a law or regulation for every different ethical situation that might emerge. As a result, the compliance-based culture, as you'll read about in your chapter, can be very limited. We don't want a very bureaucratic organization that it just restricts and eliminates any discretion that employees might have. By using this value-based approach, we can give employees flexibility to use their discretion because they are making their decisions based on the underlying values that are based on integrity. You'll also learn about the importance of leadership in this chapter. Leaders are very important for setting a cultural tone. Oftentimes, when an organization wants to change their culture, the first thing that they'll do is to remove the CEO or a leader at the top of the organization. This is oftentimes best illustrated in a sports context, where a coach or manager is fired by the owner in order to change the culture within a team. This is because leaders can have a very powerful influence on the behaviors of their employees. Leaders can very much set the tone. As we saw in our earlier Chapter 1 videos, in the Milgram studies, leaders can definitely influence employees to do things that they perhaps shouldn't. At the same time, an ethical leader can encourage, support, and promote ethical behaviors. And they can do this by making decisions in tough situations. And this really can set the tone for the employees. They will reflect back and think, what did my boss, he or she, do in this context? And they will remember, and it will help them to understand what is the appropriate behavior in a given context. So that ends the introduction to the Chapter 4 material on organizational culture.